On February 19th, 1945, at 0900 hours, Corporal Tony Stein crouched behind a shallow depression in the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, gripping a weapon his sergeant had called insane 3 months earlier. 23 years old, 6 combat missions. The Japanese had fortified every meter of this 8-square-mile rock with 11 miles of interconnected tunnels, 17,000 defenders, and overlapping fields of fire that turned the beach into a killing ground. Around him, Marines were pinned down by concentrated machine gun fire from camouflaged pillboxes they couldn't see. By mid-morning, the 5th Marine Division had already lost 43 men dead. Bodies lay scattered across the terraced beach. The Japanese couldn't believe what happened next. Tony Stein wasn't supposed to be there. He was a toolmaker, born in Dayton, Ohio, to Austrian Jewish immigrants who had fled anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. He'd spent his teenage years working a lathe at Patterson Field, then as a tool and die maker at Delco Products. He understood machines the way other men understood cards or dice. When he joined the Paramarines in September 1942, that mechanical mind went with him. On Bougainville, he'd killed 5 Japanese snipers in a single day, but it was his ability to modify equipment that caught attention. Sergeant Mel Grevich had salvaged an AN-M2 aircraft machine gun from a crashed Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber during the Bougainville campaign. The AN-M2 was designed for aerial combat. It weighed only 21 pounds, 10 pounds lighter than the standard Browning M1919. More importantly, it could fire 1,200 rounds per minute, 3 times faster than anything the Marines carried on the ground. But there was a problem. The AN-M2 had spade grips designed for aircraft mounts. No stock, no sights, no way for a single Marine to carry it and fire accurately while advancing. When Grevich approached Stein in November 1944, both men had been reassigned to the 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division. They were preparing for an operation the brass wouldn't name yet. Grevich showed Stein the AN-M2. Stein saw potential. They worked at night in a maintenance shed at Camp Tarawa in Hawaii. Stein cut down an M1 Garand buttstock, hollowing it out to accept the machine gun's buffer tube. He fabricated a solenoid trigger mechanism from sheet metal scraps. Grevich welded a Browning automatic rifle bipod to the front. They added bar rear sights for aiming. The result was crude. 25 pounds, fed by a 100-round ammunition box, capable of emptying that box in 5 seconds of continuous fire. They called it the Stinger. Stein built 6 of them. The reaction from other Marines was mixed. One sergeant said it would jam on the first burst. Another said the thin barrel would melt after 2 magazines. A platoon commander said only an idiot would carry a plain gun into an infantry fight. But when Stein test-fired it on the range, emptying a full box into a target at 200 yards in under 6 seconds, the skeptics went quiet. The Stinger was going to war. Now on the beach at Iwo Jima, Stein tightened his grip on the weapon. Around him, Marines were dying because they couldn't locate the hidden Japanese positions. Standard procedure was to call for tanks or naval gunfire, but the tanks were bogged down in soft volcanic ash, and naval shells couldn't hit what they couldn't see. Stein made a decision. He stood up, fully upright, in the middle of a beach where Japanese machine gunners had overlapping fields of fire. He exposed himself to draw enemy attention. He needed to see the muzzle flashes. Bullets snapped past his head. Mortar rounds detonated nearby. Then Stein saw it, a pillbox 75 yards northwest, the barrel of a Type 92 heavy machine gun protruding just inches. Stein lowered the Stinger, aimed, squeezed the solenoid trigger. The weapon roared to life at 1,200 rounds per minute. The pillbox disintegrated. The Type 92 fell silent. He shifted aim to a second pillbox, 40 yards left. Another burst. 5 seconds of continuous fire. The Japanese machine gun crew inside stopped shooting. Around Stein, Marines began to move. Riflemen advanced from their shallow depressions. Sergeants shouted orders. The assault was moving again. Stein charged the first pillbox. He reached the position in seconds. Inside, 3 Japanese soldiers lay dead. He moved to the second pillbox. Same result. 2 enemy soldiers down. But then the Stinger went light in his hands. The ammunition box was empty. 100 rounds gone in less than 10 seconds. Stein looked back toward the beach. 200 yards. The ammunition resupply point was near the waterline. He would have to cross open ground to get more ammunition. He started running. The volcanic sand made every step difficult. Marines called it running through ball bearings. Stein's boots sank 3 inches with each stride. Halfway to the beach, he passed a wounded Marine. Shrapnel wound to the left leg. The man was conscious but couldn't walk. Stein grabbed him, slung him over his shoulder, kept running. The Marine weighed 160 pounds. The Stinger weighed 25. His combat pack added another 30. He was carrying over 215 pounds through volcanic ash while Japanese mortars bracketed the beach. He reached the supply point at 09:45. Corpsman took the wounded Marine. Stein grabbed 4 ammunition boxes, 2 in his pack, 1 in each hand, turned back toward his platoon. The return trip took 3 minutes. Japanese snipers targeted Marines, moving between positions. Bullets kicked up black ash. A mortar round detonated 30 yards to his right. He didn't stop. His platoon sergeant pointed to a 3rd pillbox, reinforced concrete with a Type 96 light machine gun. 2 previous assaults had failed. 4 Marines were dead in front of it. Stein loaded a fresh ammunition box, stood up, advanced alone. The Type 96 opened fire immediately. Rounds snapped past his head. He kept walking forward. At 50 yards, he opened fire. The weapon's rate of fire was so high the Japanese gunner couldn't adjust his aim up fast enough. Stein's rounds found the firing slit. The enemy gun went silent. He charged the final 20 yards, dropped a grenade through the opening. The explosion killed the 3-man crew inside. The ammunition box was empty again. He'd been in combat for 46 minutes and had already gone through 300 rounds. He started his second run to the beach. This time, he found 2 wounded Marines. One had a sucking chest wound. The other had lost part of his right hand to shrapnel. He took the chest wound case first, made a 3rd trip to retrieve the second man. By 10:30 hours, Stein had made 4 trips. Each time, he'd carried a wounded Marine to safety. Each time, he'd returned with ammunition. His platoon had advanced 200 yards. They destroyed 7 enemy positions. Stein had personally killed at least 15 Japanese soldiers, but the Stinger was suffering. The barrel was discolored from heat. The solenoid trigger was starting to stick, and Stein's boots were disintegrating. The soles were nearly gone. Running in them was becoming painful. Every step sent sharp pains through his arches. Stein made a decision. He unlaced his boots and kicked them off, barefoot in volcanic ash. The decision seemed insane, but Stein understood the mathematics. Every second counted. His boots were adding friction. The ash was abrasive, but he could run faster without them. He also removed his helmet. The M1 steel pot weighed 2.5 pounds. Combined with the boots, he was shedding nearly 5 pounds. 5 pounds that would let him move faster. His 5th run took 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Barefoot, he could gain traction. His feet sank into the ash. Without rigid boot soles, he could feel the terrain and adjust his stride. It was painful, like running on broken glass, but it was faster. He grabbed another wounded Marine, shrapnel to the abdomen. The man was unconscious. Stein carried him over his shoulder, delivered him to Corpsman, loaded ammunition, ran back. By 1100 hours, Stein had made 6 trips to the beach. 6 wounded Marines saved, 600 rounds delivered, 5 more enemy positions destroyed. His platoon had advanced 300 yards. They were approaching the first airfield. Japanese resistance was intensifying. The enemy had constructed a defensive network of pillboxes, spider holes, and underground bunkers connected by tunnels. The Stinger was the only weapon in Company A that could deliver enough volume of fire to keep multiple positions suppressed simultaneously. When Stein opened up, the sheer sound of 1,200 rounds per minute made adjacent positions hesitate. That hesitation gave riflemen time to advance, but the weapon was taking damage. The barrel was now visibly glowing. The thin aircraft-grade steel wasn't designed for prolonged ground combat. It was built to be cooled by 300-mile-per-hour slipstreams. On the ground, there was no airflow, just heat. Have you ever made a decision that seemed crazy to everyone else, but made perfect sense to you? That moment when logic and courage intersect? If you've ever trusted your instincts against impossible odds, you understand what drove men like Stein. If that resonates with you, subscribe to WW2 Shadow Tales. We share stories of ordinary people making extraordinary choices. At 11:20, Stein's platoon encountered a reinforced Japanese position that had stopped 2 other companies, a concrete bunker with 3 firing slits, multiple Type 96 light machine guns inside, 2 tank destroyers had tried to knock it out. Both were hit and withdrew. An airstrike missed by 50 yards. The bunker remained operational. Stein studied the position. The firing slits were narrow, maybe 8 inches wide. Difficult targets, but the Stinger's rate of fire meant statistically some rounds would get through. He advanced alone. 50 yards from the bunker, he went prone and opened fire. The Stinger emptied its box in 7 seconds. At least 30 rounds went through the firing slits. The Japanese guns went silent. Stein reloaded, charged the bunker, dropped grenades through the slits. The explosions killed the 5-man crew. His 7th trip came at 11:50. This time, he carried a Marine who'd lost both legs below the knee to a mine. Still conscious, screaming, Stein ran 200 yards while the Marine bled into his uniform. Corpsman said later that if Stein had been 30 seconds slower, the Marine would have died. On the return trip, Stein encountered another Marine carrying a Stinger. The weapon had jammed permanently. The barrel had warped. Stein looked at his own Stinger. The barrel was discolored purple. The wooden furniture was starting to char. The bipod was loose, but it still fired. He made his 8th trip at 12:30. Another wounded Marine. Another load of ammunition. By now, other Marines had noticed the barefoot corporal making repeated runs under fire. Some thought he was crazy. Others thought he was the bravest man on Iwo Jima. Stein didn't think about bravery. He thought about mathematics. His platoon needed ammunition. Wounded men needed evacuation. He was faster without boots. Everything else was just execution. By 1400 hours, Company A had advanced 400 yards. 23 enemy positions destroyed. Stein had personally accounted for 12. His barefoot runs had saved 9 wounded Marines. The Stinger, despite being shot overheated and mechanically abused, was still firing, but its condition was critical. The barrel was visibly bent. Rate of fire decreased to 900 rounds per minute. The solenoid trigger fired in bursts of 3 to 5 rounds. The wooden stock was crumbling. At 14:30, during an assault on a fortified trench, the Stinger was hit again. A Type 99 rifle round struck the receiver. The weapon was knocked from Stein's hands. It landed 10 feet away in a shell crater. Stein was completely exposed. No cover, no weapon. Japanese soldiers were firing at him with rifles and grenades. He ran for the Stinger. A grenade exploded 5 yards behind him. Fragments hit his left leg and back. Small wounds. Painful, but not incapacitating. He grabbed the Stinger and dove into the crater. The receiver had a deep gouge. Stein cycled the action manually, stiff but functional. He loaded a fresh belt, aimed at the trench, fired. The Stinger worked, barely. Rate of fire down to 600 rounds per minute. But 600 was still faster than anything else. Stein suppressed the trench while riflemen advanced. 6 Japanese soldiers dead. That night, Japanese infiltrators probed Company A's perimeter. Small groups testing defenses. When a Japanese soldier appeared 30 yards from Stein's position, he fired a burst. The weapon worked. The infiltrator died. By dawn on February 20th, Stein had been awake 22 consecutive hours. The assault on Mount Suribachi began at 800. Company A began the climb. The terrain was brutal, loose ash, no vegetation. The enemy had fortified the mountain with over 60 pillboxes and cave positions. Stein carried the Stinger up the mountain. An armourer had worked on it overnight. The barrel was still bent, but a new belt feed mechanism was installed. At 09:30, Company A encountered a reinforced bunker complex. Stein moved forward. He suppressed the position long enough for demolition teams to advance. The bunker was destroyed. At 10:15, Stein's luck changed. A Japanese grenade landed 3 feet from his position. He tried to move. The grenade detonated. Shrapnel hit his right arm, right leg, and torso. Multiple wounds. He was bleeding heavily. Corpsman bandaged the wounds and called for evacuation. Stein refused. His platoon was still engaged. He continued fighting. For 2 hours, Stein provided fire support while bleeding through his bandages. Every time a pillbox opened fire, Stein suppressed it. But by 12:30, he'd lost significant blood. He was becoming lightheaded. His vision was narrowing. Corpsman told him he needed immediate evacuation, or he would die. This time, Stein didn't argue. He handed the Stinger to another Marine, allowed Corpsman to carry him down to the beach. He was loaded onto a landing craft and transported to a hospital ship. On February 23rd, while Stein recovered, a patrol from Company E reached the summit of Mount Suribachi. They raised an American flag. Photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the moment. The image became the most iconic photograph of the Pacific War. Stein was not present. He was receiving treatment. Doctors removed shrapnel. They treated blood loss and infection. They told him his war was over. But on February 25th, news reached the hospital ship. The 5th Marine Division had moved north. They were assaulting Hill 362A. The fighting was brutal. Company A had lost 30% of its strength. Stein's platoon sergeant was dead. His squad leader was dead. On February 26th, against medical orders, Tony Stein left the hospital ship. He climbed into a landing craft returning to the beach. He told the crew he'd been cleared. He had not been cleared. He was AWOL, but nobody stopped him. He reached the beach at 1400 hours, requisitioned new boots, grabbed an M1 Garand. The Stinger was gone. It didn't matter. Stein was going back. He walked north across Iwo Jima, 6 miles, through volcanic ash, past destroyed positions, past burned-out tanks, past Graves registration teams collecting American dead. He reached Company A at Hill 362A on February 27th. The company had been reduced to 63 men from 240. Stein reported to the company commander. He was put back on the line immediately. For 2 days, Stein fought in brutal close-quarters combat. No Stinger, just an M1 Garand and grenades. The fighting was different, slower, more deliberate, but Stein was still effective. On March 1st, 1945, Company A was tasked with a reconnaissance patrol. 19 Marines. Corporal Tony Stein was assistant patrol leader. Their mission was to move forward 400 yards, locate enemy positions, return with intelligence, no assault, just reconnaissance. At 0700 the patrol moved out. The terrain was volcanic ridges and ravines, perfect for ambush. The patrol moved slowly, 20 yards, stop, observe, 20 more yards. At 0745 the patrol reached a ridgeline overlooking a small valley. Stein moved to the front. Through volcanic rock, he could see camouflaged positions. The patrol needed to move closer. Stein signaled advance. He stepped forward. M1 Garand ready. His feet, still bandaged from the barefoot runs, ached with every step. The shrapnel wounds had not fully healed, but he moved forward. At 0752, a single shot rang out. The bullet struck Tony Stein in the head. He dropped instantly. The shot came from a concealed position 200 yards northeast. Corpsmen reached Stein within seconds, but there was nothing they could do. The wound was fatal. Corporal Tony Stein, aged 23, died on the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima at 0753 on March 1st, 1945. News of Stein's death spread quickly. The barefoot corporal who'd made 8 trips to the beach, the Marine who'd refused evacuation, the toolmaker from Dayton who'd built a weapon from salvaged aircraft parts and used it to destroy over 20 enemy positions. On March 2nd, Stein was buried in the 5th Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima. A simple wooden cross marked his grave. The battle for Iwo Jima continued 24 more days. By March 26th, when the island was declared secure, nearly 7,000 Americans were dead, 20,000 wounded. Of 21,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 1,000 survived. But on February 19th, during those first 8 hours, Tony Stein and his improvised weapon had made a difference. His barefoot runs had saved 9 wounded Marines. His suppressive fire had allowed Company A to advance. His mechanical ingenuity had given the Marine Corps a weapon that changed the tactical equation. In May 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson submitted a recommendation for Tony Stein to receive the Medal of Honor. The recommendation detailed his actions: 8 trips to the beach, 9 Marines evacuated, over 20 enemy positions destroyed, barefoot runs under fire. The recommendation was endorsed by every officer in the chain of command. Everyone agreed. Corporal Tony Stein had demonstrated conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty. On February 19, 1946, exactly 1 year after Stein's actions, his widow Joan received his Medal of Honor at the Ohio State House. Governor Frank Lauscher presented the medal. Tony's mother Rose attended, tears streaming down her face. Her son, the Jewish immigrant's child who dropped out of high school to work as a toolmaker, had received the nation's highest military honor. Tony Stein's remains stayed on Iwo Jima until 1948. In December, his body was returned to Dayton for burial, with full military honors. The ceremony drew hundreds. He was buried in Calvary Cemetery, the only Medal of Honor recipient from that city in World War II. The 5 other Stingers also saw combat on Iwo Jima. 2 were destroyed by enemy fire, 1 jammed permanently. The other 2 survived, but were lost after the war. None of the original 6 Stingers exist today. They were field modifications, non-standard equipment, but the legend lived on. Armorers heard the story. The toolmaker from Ohio, who salvaged aircraft machine guns and turned them into infantry weapons, who ran barefoot through volcanic ash, who refused evacuation, who returned to combat from a hospital ship. Tony Stein represents something fundamental about courage. When standard equipment fails, improvise. When wounded, keep fighting. When ordered to rest, return to your unit. When faced with impossible odds, charge forward. He was 23 years old when he died. He'd been a Marine for 2 years and 5 months. He saved 9 lives on a single day, and he did it all with a weapon he helped build in a maintenance shed in Hawaii. The Japanese couldn't believe a gun built from aircraft parts could kill 20 of them in one morning, until Tony Stein proved them wrong.